So let's look at the original imprint, addressing the main question, what is the purpose of life? Questions like, where do we come from? Why are we here? Where are we going? What is our destination? And to begin with, does God exist? And if so, what is God like? Now, please don't get stuck as I begin in your concept of what I mean about God. Some might substitute the concept of ultimate reality or being. My experience with my Creator suggests to me a personal, loving Creator. Not suggests, my experience has been that. But I don't want to start with a concept. I'm certainly not talking about a male figure with a long beard in the sky who throws lightning, who casually created the world and directs things from on high and makes things good or bad and controls your life and decides everything. That's not what I'm talking about. So please just put that on the side for now. Let's try to understand whether or not God exists. And if so, what is God like? Now, particularly in this day and age, there's a great conflict, seeming conflict between religion and science. The idea, because traditionally, people thought God was the one who moved the world, made everything happen, and the more that we have understood by science about how life develops, about evolution and about things like that, the less people needed to think of somebody who was making everything happen. And so conflict has come about. But actually there need be no conflict between religion and science, because actually they are complementary. And one of the beautiful things about the principle and this series today is that it balances religion and deep spiritual and philosophical questions with science. Why? Because both religion and science are expressions of human beings' desire to understand and know the truth. Yes? Yes? Science is our pursuit of external knowledge. Our environment, the world, material, the laws, the principles, how it works, how to make it better. But science ultimately exists to answer what question? When science talks about life, it can only talk about how life came about. It doesn't address the issues of why, the purpose, or the value. Now, religion is not there to tell you, when there's a story in a scripture that says in 6 days God did this or that, that's not a literal description of the scientific reality. That's a metaphorical story that addresses the question, why? What's the meaning? What's the value of human life? So it's it's a misstatement what many people are doing. What the radicals on both sides are doing is placing the understanding of a literal understanding of Genesis, that God made us out of clay in 6 days, whether that's more logical or whether human evolution is more logical. That's not the case. That's not the issue here. The purpose of the biblical understanding is not to give us a scientific, recounting of how life came into being. Like I said, it's poetic, metaphorical, and it raises the question that human beings cannot avoid asking. What's the meaning of my life? Why am I here? What's my connection to the bigger picture? And science can't alone necessarily answer that question. The real issue, the real question here, is not whether we were made in 6 days or we developed over time and a large part of our development is evolutionary, which I don't quarrel with at all. The real question is, are we here accidentally? Or are we here on purpose? Does life exist? Does life exist by chance or by design? That's the question. It's got to be one or the other, right? Let's look at that question. Either way, if this is just an amazing cosmic happy accident, I hope it's happy. If this is just an amazing cosmic happy accident, it's still miraculous, right? We're breathing, we're living, we're loving. How did it all happen? If it came by accident, how mind-boggling is that? How amazing and fantastic would that be? Out of chaos, came a cosmos that's organized and purposeful and directed, and nothing exists by itself or for itself. It's purposeful, it's directed, it's meaningful, and human life has all kinds of meaning and value, and human beings are meaning makers. We want to understand the meaning of things. We look for patterns and meaning and purpose and value and why, and if that's all a happy accident, it's unbelievable. Out of nothing, zip, zilch, zero, nada, came a world teeming with life. Out of nothing. How did it get here? And there are three big questions that science alone cannot solve. Science has been unable and cannot digest these three questions. The first is, these questions are beyond the capacity of science. The first is the origin of the universe. How the universe came to be. Evolution correctly analyzes how life develops. By the way, we only are able to see microevolution, which is the idea that any species responding to its environment, inheriting genes, will develop. Nothing wrong with that. But we have never proved and can't see macroevolution, that a new species comes about alone by evolution alone of itself. But even evolution, which I and the principle do not quarrel with, cannot explain how life came to be initially, how the universe got here. So that's beyond the capacity of science. I'm going to talk about this first question in a moment. The second one is the origin of life, how living beings came about. Science has tried to generate life in a test tube, to create life out of chemicals, and to imitate the early Earth's atmosphere and make life come about naturally by itself. Can't do it. Can't do it. And the third one is the mystery of consciousness. Even the most strong atheistic scientists will confess that science doesn't understand where consciousness comes from. Although atheists and materialists would suggest it's a product of the brain, there's a ton of research and understanding that indicates that the brain perhaps is a channel of consciousness rather than the producer of it. And there's still many questions that any honest scientist will tell you they haven't figured out. Our subjective self-awareness, you know, the feeling that there's a me inside here. According to the atheistic view, that's just brainwaves. You have no me inside you. There's no objective self. It's just the product of your brain. But don't you feel like there's a you inside you? There's a me in here looking out at the world and trying to figure it out and relating with people and responding and growing. And so it's still beyond the capacity of science. Now, looking at these three things real quickly. This is our current cosmological understanding of how the universe came to be. It's called, boom, the Big Bang. Using the Hubble telescope in the 20th century and measuring background radiation, it was found that the universe is expanding at a particular rate, and it's slowing down little by little by little. And they just calculated backwards, and it goes perfectly back into one point called singularity. And they know about how many, they can calculate about how many billion years ago that happened. And within 1 second, the universe was almost half as big as it is now. And through that, they now understand, that's how they began to understand where black holes come from and quarks. And that's why they began to see all these things, because by understanding this, it suggested that all these things would be there. If this happened, the universe would look just like it does and would be doing just what it does. So it's a theory. But the point is, when you go back to this beginning point, singularity, that's the beginning of time and space. When you get down to that point, all the laws of physics and science break down. They don't work anymore. And whatever caused that explosion is outside of time, space, and the physical universe, right? Just logically. So we're talking about a metaphysical cause. Something that isn't part of this universe of reality. Something that's outside of time and space. Whatever caused the bang, out of nothing to come something, is beyond what we can measure scientifically, as I said. Okay? I'm not going to go any further with that. This is Stanley Miller, one of the most famous scientists who sought to create life in a test tube, who sought to reproduce the early atmosphere of the Earth, the same chemicals and gases, and mimic lightning going through the atmosphere and try to generate the chain of life. And without going into detail about what happened and what he claimed and how it was debunked, simply speaking, no one has ever been able to generate life spontaneously. Therefore, the current best scientific conclusion is that life has only been brought about by living beings. Life comes only from life. There's not an ability to connect inorganic and dead things to life things automatically. Right? So the origin of life. And thirdly, consciousness. I'm not going to take a lot of time with this, because this is just introductory. But there are so many, many things occurring in the world today, and understandings of science, and experiences like Dr. Eben Alexander, who practiced here in the Boston area. He was brain dead for 7 days, and so badly. And what's the disease that meningitis took over and destroyed his brain function, and all the traditional explanations that scientists give for why people have near-death experiences when they're unconscious, how they experience ancestors and relatives and a glowing light and have unearthly experiences, all of those couldn't be used. All of those couldn't cover what was going on in his brain. So he wrote this book, Proof of Heaven. And then now this movie that just came out a week ago, Heaven is Real, based on the experiences of a young boy who I think his appendix burst during an operation, and he, in a state of unconsciousness. It's not just that he had these experiences, but it's what he learned, who he talked to in his ancestors, what he came back with and could explain to his parents. The number of young people around the age of 2 that are able to recall the experiences and lives and names and living places and addresses and family members of people who are dead. University of Virginia has a whole study on these things. So without going any further, I'm just saying that these are things that can't be comprehended by science alone. Now, chance or accident, okay? Let's figure it out. If I were to try and convince you that this pen is an accident, it came about all by itself, who would believe me? Nobody, right? You look at it and say, no, somebody made that. It's obvious somebody made it, right? It's cylindrical. Every single part of it has a purpose, does something, it's functional. It's organized, it's symmetrical, it's purposeful. And you know somebody made it with a purpose. Well, look at everything in the universe. Everything. I mean, even mosquitoes that you don't like, and rats that mess up cities. But that's all because of our imbalance. Our imbalance. Originally, every single living organism, snakes, everybody, has a balanced purpose and part of the cycle of life. Nothing exists for nothing. We have a video camera here, okay? We have a video camera here. Okay. Taking a picture in the back of the room. Now, Dave is working with this camera, and this camera is not just something that somebody thought up in a moment. It's an evolved concept. It evolved from many other designs and ideas over hundreds of years, right? We had to learn how to bend light and how to refract light. We created cameras and shadow boxes and all kinds of things, eventually developing video technology. Think of all the logic and investment and creativity and energy and planning that was necessary to make that. But you know, the video camera is just a cheap imitation of your eyeball. And so to suggest that this is simply mere accident seems illogical. It actually runs counter to our human logic and understanding. Another interesting point, when Charles Darwin, who actually, I really am inspired by Darwin's depth and insight and struggle and the questions he asked and the bravery to figure things out, and his own struggle with whether God existed and the pain of life and the loss of his daughter, all the things that made him struggle. But when Darwin developed his theory of evolution, he believed that things started simply. And he said, if we ever got down to show that there's a level of complexity that can't be reduced to more simple, that'll undermine my whole theory. But at the time when evolution was developed, we thought that a one-celled bacteria, like the most simple organism, we thought it was a blob of protoplasm inside, with nothing complex or difficult. But in fact, now we know that inside a one-celled bacterium is more information in DNA than 1,000 encyclopedia sets. That inside that one-celled bacterium and the flagellum that moves it, it's a complex machine with a cooling system and gears and a universal joint. There's, right at the very basic level of life, there's so much information in the DNA. Like I said, more than 1,000 encyclopedias inside the first. And by the way, DNA is based on how many it's a combination of how many chemicals? 4. It's a 4-part code. This computer and the most complex developed computers that human beings have made are based on a 2-part binary code. DNA is more complex than any computer ever, any language, any program, anything we've ever developed. The DNA inside the first existing form of life is far more complex than anything we've developed until now. The universe didn't start simple. And someone would say, well, given the time and the vastness of space, given all that time and all the planets and all the vastness, the chance that something could develop is yeah, but then if you look at all the factors necessary for life to exist, there are 30 different constants that have to be exactly right. If they're just a tiny bit different, the chances of life like ours as we know it are infinitesimally small. Stephen Hawking, great scientist, wrote The Brief History of Time. He said, you know, actually we can explain the development of the universe without God because the laws of the universe themselves brought the universe into being. But I have 2 questions for Dr. Hawking. First of all, why are there laws? Even evolution is a set of principles. Why out of chaos are there principles? Who made them? Well, scientists have tried to show that. They made a computer program and they started with, I think, 4 or 5 rules. And they started the program in motion, and guess what? The program evolved. The program, by its function, created more rules and became more and more complex. That proves the possibility of evolution. But wait a minute. Somebody had to make the computer, somebody had to set up the program, somebody had to program the first rules and get the whole... So to me, it proves my point, not theirs. And my second question, when did laws make anything come into existence? Laws describe behavior. To say that the laws of the universe made the universe come to be is like saying the principles of banking and finance will put money in your bank account. That'd be nice. No, without an agent, without somebody to do something, act and move. So the laws simply describe what happens and how it happens. They can't make it happen. We can't get away from some cause or agent that's necessary. Even if it's an endless chain of causality, as some religious perspectives believe, which I have no quarrel with that. Okay, there's a lot more I could say, but this is just introductory. This Francis Collins is the atheist who converted to faith and led the team that mapped the human genome for the first time. And he said this, I see DNA, the information molecule of all living things, as God's language, and the elegance and complexity of our own bodies and the rest of nature as a reflection of God's plan. This is the co-founder of quantum theory. Now, if I were to talk about quantum mechanics and quantum principles, there's a whole new understanding. For example, you know, the quantum understanding and the new development of science in the 20th and 21st century begins to support some of the fundamental principles of the world's ancient faiths. The quantum understanding of the universe recognizes that you participate in what you see in the environment. We have a subjective impact on what's going on in the world around us. I'm not going to go any further because it would make your brain come out of your ear. For example, did you know that if you took I'll just do one thing to just make your brain get a little weird, okay? If you took all the space out of the universe, all the actual nothing out of the universe, The universe is like 99 point something percent nothing. Nothing. Not space with molecules and no, nothing. For, you know, what's the basic building block of material? It's the atom, right? And what is an atom? It's mostly nothing. If you take a hydrogen atom, you've got a nucleus with a proton, and you've got an electron revolving around it. And between the nucleus and the electron is what? Not space. Space sounds like there's something there. It's nothing. It's nothing that we can measure. If you expanded the nucleus until it was the size of a dime, the electron would be about 4 football fields away. And in between that is nothing. This is how much substance there is. The rest is nothing. Scientists now consider that if we took all of the nothing out of the universe could fit in a bucket. It should make you think about what's really important in life. Is it really the material things? Is it really the car and what's really going on? Why are we really here? What's really the meaning of our awareness and consciousness and sharing and what we're doing together? You can tell I like this stuff, but I'm going to control myself. By the way, electrons, when you grew up in school, you learned that electrons were this physical fixed thing, and you saw a diagram of a nucleus and do you know that electrons aren't actually real physical things? They appear and disappear. They're there sometimes and they're not sometimes. Science has gone way beyond what you studied, believe me. This is what Planck said. As a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science, I can tell you as a result of my research about atoms this much. There is no matter as such. It all originates and exists by virtue of a force which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds the most minute solar system of the atom together. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. Einstein reached the same conclusion. So if we ask the question, chance or design, and if you agree with me that it's more reasonable to understand that the universe is not an accident, but it's on purpose, then design implies a designer. And designer implies creator. It's another way of saying creator.